bright, and several years of homeschooling had left him, at least in my judgment, ill-prepared for social interactions with the other kids. But his math and reading skills were top-notch. Full marks to his mom, who had been his teacher until tough economic times sent her back into the workforce. "The cannibal stuff is no worse than lots of other things in books and TV," Eldon said defensively. "Should McCarthy have left that out?" I asked Andrew. He considered the question. "No, I'm not saying that. It made me sick to read it, but it's the thing I most remember, so I guess that means it worked." "I think it's a love story," said Emma Katzenbach, who had amazingly decided to look up from her phone for a second. She had it down in her lap where she thought it would somehow escape my notice. "There's no love story," said Eldon, rolling his eyes. "Not that kind of love story," she shot back. "It's a father-son love story." "Emma's on to something," I said. And it was then that something outside caught my eye. A man, for a brief moment, I thought he was in his mid-teens, but looking at him for a full second persuaded me he was probably as old as 20, was crossing the parking lot running between geography teacher Nancy Holcomb's green Hyundai and the 3-year-old Lexus SUV that belonged to our principal, Trent Wakely. He was decked out in camel pants, unlaced combat boots, and an olive green vest with multiple pockets. Tucked into them vertically were items that looked like thick cigars, but cigars weren't generally flat red in color. I was certainly no demolitions expert, but I'd seen enough movies and TV shows to know what dynamite looked like. The man was striding toward the school's west end, but only one arm was moving back and forth. His right hand was held close to his body, in a fist, as though he had it wrapped around something. The first thing I thought of was the set of double doors our visitor was probably headed for. They often did not latch properly. Students and even some staff were known to prop them open with a brown rubber doorstop or wood shim so they could sneak outside for a smoke and still be able to get back into the building. None of my students had looked out the window and noticed him. Barely 2 seconds had gone by since I'd responded to Emma's comment. "I hadn't thought of that," said Marion Gilchrist, who always took a seat right at the front of the class, not so much because she was particularly studious, but because she wore glasses thicker than hockey rink ice. I said as calmly as I could, but unable to keep the edge out of my voice, "I'm going to the office, Eldon. Close the shades. Marion, you lock the door behind me. Block it with as many desks as you can." The kids blinked, glanced at each other. A couple of them were forming questions. "What's going— Why— Now," I said. And because Emma already had a phone secreted in her hand, I pointed and said firmly, "Emma, 911. She looked at me blankly, as though asking what it was she was supposed to say when her 911 call was answered. "Armed intruder," I said. There wasn't time for specifics, and then I bolted from the room, slamming the door shut behind me, trusting the kids would do as I'd said, and start building a barricade. Not a bad plan to keep a gunman out of the room, but would it be enough to save them from an explosion? The West End doors were at the far end of the corridor, which in the 15-plus years I had worked at Lodge High School here in Milford had never looked longer. The hallway was a mile-long tunnel stretching out in front of me. I needed to get to those doors before that man with the explosives strapped to his body. I ran flat out, shouting as I went, "Lockdown! Lockdown!" I sped past classroom doors, open and closed, lessons underway. Jerry Hillier, door open, droning on in front of his calculus class. The students in Rhonda Flynn's chemistry class, visible behind the door window, conducting God knows what kind of experiments. Social studies teacher Preston Hindle, visible for a millisecond through the small pane of glass, no doubt trying his hardest to turn his kids into well-rounded citizens. I heard doors closing behind me. We'd done the drills. You think it will never happen, but no, it might, and yet, despite that, no one had fixed that fucking door. Par for the course for our caretaker, Ronnie Grant. Not everyone remembered our emergency procedures. Instead of closing her door, Rhonda stepped out into the hall and called out after me. "Is this for real or just a Somewhere someone wiser shouted, "Get inside!" My route took me past the office. As I flew by, I caught a glimpse of our principal, Trent, and shouted, "Lockdown!" one more time.